let's get to the latest on the Israel-Hamas war. And for that, we're joined now by Dr. Alon Burstein. Alon, always good to see you. I want to get straight into the news because we do have an interesting thing that happened tonight. President Biden gave a spur-of-the-moment address in the White House. That's not something we see him do very often. He mostly spoke about today's special counsel report. He also spoke about his age to a degree, but he also spoke a little bit on the Israel-Hamas war. Let's listen to this.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top.
All right, over the top. Is this some of the most direct criticism we've actually seen from Biden towards Israel so far?
By far. This is by far the most, I'll say even extreme, criticism that we've seen. Not that the words are so harsh, but taken within context. The words are very harsh. The Biden administration has been unwavering in its support of Israel, trying to push aid packages towards Israel, blocking condemnations of Israel in the United Nations. It has really done everything that it could, almost diplomatically, and something seems to have switched. It's not just what President Biden said tonight, although that is, again, almost a, diplomatic, not knockout, but certainly a blow. There's also a lot of reports about the visit of Secretary of State Antony Blinken that he just concluded in Israel today, stating that he's not happy with what he saw there. Not only was he supposed to go to the Kerem Shalom crossing in order to view the crossing of aid trucks, but he did not go because Israel could not guarantee that there wouldn't be wild protests against him. In his meetings with Netanyahu, it was reported that he sees in Netanyahu someone who is actually not committed to returning the hostages as much as even Blinken is. He also stated that he's appalled at Netanyahu's involving politics as far as he can see, to save his own seat, in the interest on top of or instead of or at the expense of a hostage deal. It was also later said that Blinken actually suspects that Netanyahu wants to have a collision with the United States over the idea of a Palestinian state, because this will aid Netanyahu in his right-wing base in Israel to show that he's standing up to the United States. I think this has a lot to do with Biden's statements today. It's not a coincidence that we heard that Antony Blinken is leaving with this very bad feeling from the Israeli administration, and then all of a sudden, also, President Biden is saying they've gone too far. We had other statements from the White House today saying that they're worried if Israel actually plans to invade Rafah because they may not have thought it out. Something seems to have changed. This trip, at least from leaks, but also connecting the dots, did not seem to go well for Israel.
Does language like this rise to the level where you feel Israel will actually have to respond to what Biden said tonight?
I do not think Israel will respond officially. Like we've talked about often, Netanyahu is very, very boxed in from within his government. He has very hawkish right-wing elements pulling him in a certain direction. Then he has also some more centrist elements pulling him in another direction. And Israel is entirely beholden to the United States, despite rhetoric that Netanyahu likes to say that Israel makes its own decisions and is not beholden to anyone. The fact is that Israel is beholden to the United States not only for aid packages that just today was approved in the Senate, the first step of $14 billion of aid, not only in aid of armaments, but primarily diplomatic. If not for the United States, Israel would be condemned so heavily in the United Nations. There would be sanctions against it. I mean, not things that are necessarily justified, right? The United Nations also has its own biases against Israel. I'm just saying a fact. The fact is that Israel is beholden to the United States in this. At the same time, I do not necessarily see the Biden administration right now turning this into something concrete. I don't see them actually withholding aid or actually turning this into something that they'll threaten Israel, that they will not protect them diplomatically. I think what we're seeing is the Biden administration giving a signal to Netanyahu, saying, you know what, the blank check, for 4 months now the war's been going on, the blank check that you've gotten to do anything you want with our support is starting to run out. Now it seems that you're going to have to work with us in a more concrete way. I think that's what these messages are trying to at least give.
Interesting words from the president tonight. I do want to move on to Gaza as well, Doctor. The AP reports that Israeli airstrikes killed at least 13 people in Rafah in the southern portion of Gaza. The AP updated the numbers from the Al Jazeera report that you're seeing on your screen right now. I want to play a clip that's been making the rounds. It was even picked up and posted by the Israeli government. It's of a man who appears to be migrating within Gaza. Let's watch this.
نحن محبة وأطفال كمل بالخمسة كمل يا سنوار فهدية الجنون الأكثر كمل بس عدا بتركيا بسنوار بده خدماء وين السنوار نحن وين خالد المسعى وين السنوار.
Now, it's impossible to know how everyone feels in Gaza. It's impossible to know how everyone feels in Gaza. But do we know how prevalent this type of sentiment is in the enclave?
We really don't. I mean, even, in the quote-unquote peaceful times, which is never peaceful in Gaza, but like prior to the war, there's no reliable polling done. I mean, Hamas runs an authoritarian dictatorship. So it's really impossible to know. One of the things we have seen, though, in this war that we have not seen during the Hamas administration of the Gaza Strip, which by now has been over 16 years, is we have seen protests. All of a sudden, I think we spoke about this several weeks ago, there's been a few protests that sprung up organically. That is really, really surprising. In a country or an area, it's not a country of its own, that actually does not have any democratic tradition. Those people have never had democratic elections except for once in 2006 and possibly once again in 1996. To have a social movement, to have people get up, make signs, start chanting, shows that there's an awakening, shows that people are saying, I've had enough of this. And they're not actually mobilizing violently, which is, again, the pattern in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This clip specifically and several others, you're right, were picked up by the IDF. It's hard to know how authentic also everything is. The people they're talking to are soldiers. They're the IDF soldiers. So the fact that they're telling the IDF soldiers, yes, we're against Hamas, again, the person who's speaking there seems genuine, but we can't authenticate that. What we do know is that the people of Gaza have suffered tremendously as a result of these ongoing wars with Israel. What has happened each and every time is that since 2007, when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, is Israel bombards from the sky. Twice it invaded, then it withdraws. The people have suffered, but then Hamas rebuilds. One of the things that Israel's now saying is, we're not going to withdraw because we're not going to have that dynamic because Hamas comes out on top. The people see Israel destroyed, but Hamas is rebuilding. So instead, we're going to now have this. That's what Netanyahu's line is. We're going to have a security presence on the ground in order to break this equation. It's really impossible to know what the people are feeling. I imagine that there's a mixture of feelings on both sides. On the one hand, I can't imagine that most people in Gaza have any love for Israel and for what Israel's done to the Gaza Strip. At the same time, they also see that Hamas is not actually caring for the people, that Hamas has actually been fighting the war. So I imagine there's just anger at all sides. I will also add that anger is probably going to end up being vented at whoever is in charge. If Israel stays occupying the Gaza Strip, it's not going to receive love from the Palestinian people. In turn, if Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip again, it's also probably going to be the recipient of some wrath of the people. There's probably just anger at everyone at this point.
Yeah, and keeping in Gaza, let's pull up this from the Jerusalem Post. Reuters and the Jerusalem Post are reporting that Israeli forces are, quote, peeling back Hamas infrastructure in Khan Yunis more than 2 months after entering the Gaza Strip's main southern city. And they believe that the Palestinian faction's Gaza chief, Yahya Sinwar, is hiding there. That's according to a senior military officer that told the outlet that. Why could the IDF be peeling back from an area despite an influential figure being in that area?
So I'm not sure. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if this was translated correctly. I think when the Israeli military put this out, I think they meant that they are peeling back, almost like you're peeling an onion, like peeling back the layers of Hamas infrastructure, and actually like deepening the hold. I haven't seen any reports that the IDF is pulling out or descaling its activity in Khan Yunis. In fact, in Western Khan Yunis, we've seen a great intensifying of the fighting in the last 24 hours. So I think that may be just a mistaken translation of that specific tweet. In general, though, the IDF is starting to face a problem. And that is, first of all, the troops right now, again, we're just past the 4-month mark. Like, this is the most intensive war that Israel's ever fought. That Israel's fought a lot of wars. And it is by far the most intensive war that Israel's ever fought. Its ranks are starting to thin. There's actually laws being passed in Israel right now to change the draft structure so that people will be required to stay in the army longer and to move up the draft of people who are supposed to be drafted next year because the army's running out of troops. Again, not running out because too many are killed, but running out just because people are, again, involved in the muds of Gaza for 4 months. So the IDF is trying to move its troops around and trying to let more troops go home, refresh themselves. So that is one of the reasons that is sort of getting stuck right now. in the areas of Khan Yunis. I think also the IDF right now doesn't really know how quickly to try to take over Khan Yunis. It appeared a week ago that the IDF was going to complete Khan Yunis, then there was going to be this truce, then possibly the Operation Rafah will come next. Right now, the truce is completely stalled. Right, the best efforts hope that possibly, maybe in 10 days, there may be negotiations that can then develop to something. So then, if the IDF manages to take over Khan Yunis, is it going to invade Rafah? If the IDF invade Rafah, that is a major operation. That is something that's going to take weeks, if not months. The IDF does not want to be in the middle of that when a truce is called. So I think right now, we're probably going to see a lot more intensifying fighting in Khan Yunis, while the IDF is still waiting to see if it's going to invade Rafah or not. Another damning report came out today in the New York Times stating that, in fact, according to at least U.S. intelligence, the IDF is not doing nearly as well as the IDF says it's doing. The report stated also that the U.S. intelligence has doubts that the IDF can even destroy Hamas, that destroying Hamas is some sort of slogan, but can it really do that? And in addition, it also stated that while different sources in Israel are stating that Hamas has lost half its forces, or that it's taken out 17 or 18 of Hamas's 24 brigades, that actually U.S. intelligence thinks that maybe Hamas has lost a third of its forces. That's a big difference between looking at 18 out of 24 brigades or a third of its forces. We don't know, right? Who do we trust at this point? Both intelligence sources are probably relying on the same information, but it does appear that right now, at least what's going on in Khan Yunis, the IDF is not managing to secure the city the way it thought it would, or at least at the speed that it thought it would, and is waiting to see what happens next. If it is in fact true that the IDF has done a lot less damage to Hamas than what the figures that have been publishing in Israel, that also is going to be considered by the United States, and then maybe also feeding into what the president is saying, like, you know what, maybe it's time to start scaling back on the war. You're not succeeding in what you said you're going to succeed. That's all me guessing at this point.
Yeah, and when we talk about that report that was speaking, and you say that correctly, they were peeling back the infrastructure. Reports have said that Yahya Sinwar could be very, very deep within this tunnel system. What do we know about, and there was even a report today to say that they're pretty confident that he is in Khan Yunis. What kind of tunnel system are we talking about here? We've seen so many pictures of these systems, but in the Yahya Sinwar case, is it looking a little different possibly?
So in this case, I'll say, since the IDF didn't know what the tunnels looked like, I certainly don't know. The IDF was reportedly very, very surprised at the extent of tunnels. Prior to the invasion of Gaza, the IDF estimated that there were 400 to 500 kilometers of tunnels. That is maybe, I'll say, 300 miles or something like that. What it has uncovered until now tells it that there are over 750 kilometers. So at least 25%, if not more, larger than what they thought. And they haven't even gotten to Rafah yet, or to the central areas of Deir al-Balah. So the IDF clearly does not know what the network of tunnels does involve. Most of these tunnels are divided into two types. There's strategic tunnels and attack tunnels. The attack tunnels are the ones that don't go that deep underground, and they're used for tactical purposes. They are the ones that the idea that right now, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are plaguing the IDF in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. People are emerging from a tunnel, attacking and fleeing back to the tunnel, so you don't know where they're coming from. These strategic tunnels are the ones that we've seen more pictures of. They're the ones that go deep underground. Sometimes they're a mile long. They go underneath schools and mosques, so it's very hard to actually attack them. They have in them infrastructure. They have in them holding cells for hostages, kitchens, bathrooms, air conditioning systems, prayer rooms, all kinds of things. Chances are Yahya Sinwar is in those types of tunnels. One of the things that we also saw was a very strategic tunnel that was found in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip connecting different cities. So again, this doesn't mean the tunnel is any more than maybe 3 miles long, but it connected the areas of El Bureid refugee camp, if I'm not mistaken, and the areas of the southern parts of Gaza City. That went actually underneath the areas that the IDF was holding. Chances are there are even more sophisticated tunnels connecting Khan Yunis and Rafah, and it's likely that Yahya Sinwar is there, under the assumption that if the IDF does manage to actually get to him, he'll be able to flee to Rafah. There was a report in Israel today that suggested, didn't say with full certainty, that Yahya Sinwar has not been in contact with the external leadership of Hamas for over 10 days, saying that he is now fighting for his life or fleeing for his life and has not actually made contact. If that's true, that's very critical, not only because it tells us something about the fact that he is in fact on the run, but more importantly, it tells us that Hamas's response to the deal that was given to Egypt and Qatar that's now being negotiated was actually not negotiated with Yahya Sinwar, which is a positive and a negative, it's a positive in the sense if he's on the run, it's a positive for the war. It's a negative in the sense that means that he has not approved it, even if Israel were to say agree to everything. So his location is very important, both for understanding the trajectory of the war, but also for understanding how these negotiations and the truce may actually unfold. So we don't know.
I want to ask about Rafah really quick before we go here, because all indicators seem to point toward some sort of ground activity. We heard about an airstrike taking place that killed a number of people in Rafah. Is there any chatter, perhaps, between some of the entities involved in these mediations and these negotiations for a ceasefire? Is there any sort of urgency to try and get this deal done before any sort of extended activity takes place in Rafah? Is that something that they're talking about?
Egypt is by far the one that is most scared of an IDF activity in Rafah for two reasons. One, this would actually violate the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. According to the peace treaty, the two countries are not allowed to have more than a certain amount of troops near the border. If Israel invades, obviously that's going to happen. One. But two, more importantly to Egypt, they're afraid that if Israel invades Rafah, there's going to be a mass fleeing of hundreds of thousands, possibly, of Palestinians into their areas of Sinai, which not only will make them deal with the humanitarian catastrophe and refugees, it's also security danger. It puts them at risk of security because the people fleeing are going to include Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're then going to try to attack Israel from Egypt. Egypt is most scared. Egypt is trying desperately to get the deal done as fast as possible. And it is also explicitly in the negotiations said it wants assurances about Israel's lack of activity in Rafah. It wants Israel to stop what it's calling escalatory rhetoric about Rafah. Egypt is most concerned about this. Then you have humanitarian aid organizations and the UN that's also very concerned, but they're not part of the negotiations. Israel and Hamas are playing hardball. They're both saying, we have no urgency. We want the other side to come to us. So Egypt is really the only one of the different parties, even though everyone should display urgency because it's matters of life and death for everyone. But Egypt is the only one that's publicly saying we need to get this done fast before something happens in Rafah, under the understanding that once Khan Yunis is secured, Rafah is going to be next. The IDF is not going to just stop in its place. So, we'll see that maybe in the next coming days, maybe next week. Egypt wants to see advances in the deal so that even if it's not signed, they could say, okay, IDF, do not invade because you don't want to be caught in the middle of Rafah when you all of a sudden have to stop. So hold your line here. That's, I think, at least why Egypt is also the one that's taking the lead. The talks are happening right now in Egypt. Previously, the talks happened in Qatar. Egypt is the one that's calling everyone saying, for God's sakes, come talk, get this done.
Dr. Burstein, as always, we appreciate your time. Take care, and we always look forward to your daily YouTube updates on the war as well. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.